Beware, as you might run into a spirit or two at these abandoned ghost towns. You might want to think twice before visiting these scary places, because these are the top 5 haunted ghost towns you should never visit. Coming in at number 5, we have Bodie, California. Located up in the Bodie Hills in Mono County, California near Yosemite, in 1859 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodie died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodie was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned to a well-populated town. Though, like most mining towns, it saw its peak, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century. A series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. Dinner tables are still set up, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel is held up by a beam have been left untouched for 100 years. Though since it has been left and abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in crumbling state of decay, while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 16 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodie has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from the abandoned buildings. They take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodie. Thus, the curse of Bodie emerged, where if you take something from Bodie, bad luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass, or their romantic life to tank from stealing from Bodie. Coming in at number 4, we have Bannack, Montana. The once bright star of Montana is now a ruin, a town in arrested decay, with few remaining storefronts, saloons, and hotels. The town was founded in 1862 when a group of Pikes Peakers from the goldfields of Colorado set up camp on the banks of the creek. Finding gold, the miners staked claims and promptly failed to keep the find a secret. By the spring of 1863, the area boasted a population of 5,000. By 1864, Bannack had started to fade, losing importance. The remnants of the past still exist with empty buildings and weathered wood. Today, over 60 structures remain standing, most of which can be explored. The town is known as a site for paranormal activity. It is known that ghosts of the abandoned town walk the streets of Bannack. The most common ghost story, though, is the story of Dorothy Dunn. In August 1916, Dorothy Dunn, her cousin Fern, and a friend waded into a dredge pond and stepped into deep water, but none of the three knew how to swim. Luckily, a passerby was able to save both Fern and the friend, but Dorothy was not as lucky. Today, the site of the tragic drowning is referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometime after the accident, Bertie saw a ghost of her friend upstairs in the hotel of the town. She recognized Dorothy by a long blue dress. Although Bertie rarely discussed the sightings, other visitors began to report seeing the spirit of a young girl in a long blue dress in the window of the hotel. Others have reported cold spots, and some have reported trying to speak to the girl in a long blue dress. Bannack was filled with adult workers, crimies, murders, and of course the notorious sheriff and outlaw Henry Plummer, whose vast gang terrorized and robbed southwest Montana for years. Henry Plummer was handsome, well-dressed, and charismatic. He was also able to gain the trust of the area miners and was soon elected sheriff of the community. However, little did the citizens of Bannack know, but their new sheriff led a secret band of road agents called the Innocents, who began to terrorize the travelers between Bannack and Virginia City, robbing and ending more than 100 men over the next several months. Once caught for his terrible actions, Henry Plummer met his fatal end at the hands of the town's citizens. Today, many say that the ghost of Henry Plummer haunts this old settlement. Perhaps he wants to avenge his name. In at number 3, we have Thurmond, West Virginia. The historic town of Thurmond, located in the heart of New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurmond in the 1880s. Captain Thurmond passed in 1910, but the town continued its growth. During its height in the 1920s, the town was flourishing with a number of businesses and facilities in the railway industry. Thurmond had 2 banks, 2 hotels, stores, a cinema, and offices. Yet after a series of setbacks, Thurmond soon went from boom to bust. A number of factors played a role in the town's slow decline. The first problem was the increased rail competition and the emergence of cars. Then in 1930, a fire that led to the closure of the biggest hotel in the town, the Dunglen Hotel, only furthered the decline. The final fate of the town was the Great Depression, and by 1950 Thurmond was a ghost town. Thurmond saw a small revival during World War II when coal was in high demand, but it was not enough. Afterward, the coal fields began to play out. Today Thurmond stands at just 5-person population, which is why it is nearly vacant ghost town, as the remaining residents either move on or pass away. The house and the land it sits on became the property of the National Park Service. Walking around Thurmond today is a sad reminder of the countless other boom towns which once thrived with human activity, but today are silent and forgotten. Many buildings have long since disappeared, either torn down or, as in the case of the well-loved hotel, burnt to the ground in suspicious circumstances. Many of the family homes lie in increasingly decaying condition, while some have disappeared altogether, leaving only behind a white picket fence and wildflowers which still blossom untended each year. The eerie atmosphere of Thurmond led many visitors to believe that this almost abandoned town is haunted. In at number 2 we have Cahawra Ghost Town. Alabama is home to many small towns. While some of these towns have very few residents, others are true ghost town because they've been completely abandoned. It's no secret that small abandoned towns give off an eerie vibe. As a matter of fact, one Alabama ghost town in particular that fits the bill is Old Cahawra. The small town of Old Cahawra is located in Dallas County. From 1820 to 1826, this small town served as Alabama's first state capital. Before the Civil War, Cahawra was a busy trade city located at the junction of the Alabama and Cahawra rivers. Over the years, floods and decay have affected this historical town. Thus, by 1900, the town was completely abandoned. Today, Old Cahawra is Alabama's most famous ghost town. Many buildings still stand, like the church, schoolhouse, and some houses. However, they have been left untouched for decades. You can still walk the streets of Cahawra and see the ruins and abandoned buildings, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for the ghostly orbs that have been reported to appear in the garden maze at the home of C.C. Peggs. Additionally, many locals share similar ghost stories from the ghost town. While it's known that Cahawra is filled with paranormal activity, one groundskeeper that works at the New Cahawra Cemetery has reported hearing voices as they worked. While tourist groups claim to have recordings of unusual sounds, and others say they've captured unexplained lights or shadows in photographs. Another site that's reportedly haunted is the Barker House. This mansion was built in 1860 by Stephen Barker and contained slave quarters behind the house. After people started leaving the town in 1870s, the house was bought by Samuel McGurdy Kirkpatrick. It burned in 1935 and was rebuilt, but today it's in pretty bad condition. The only people usually left inside are paranormal investigators. Reports from said investigators include seeing a ball rolling across the floor on its own, and a stuffed animal appearing to communicate with something else in the room. But the most well-known haunting in Cahawra is Peggs' ghost. Colonel Christopher Claudius Peggs was the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment and was wounded leading a charge at the Battle of Seven Pines in Virginia in May 1862. He died from his wounds 2 months later, on July 15th. As the story goes, a couple were walking behind Peggs' home in the spring of 1862. As they walked, they spotted a ball of light. They tried to touch it, but their hands went right through it. It disappeared, but later came back and followed the couple. Due to all the mysterious crimes that happened in association to Peggs, seeing an orb around his former house is considered a bad omen and possibly even a supernatural warning. And finally, in at number 1 we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. Located in a quiet valley of Columbia County, Pennsylvania, is one of the state's least likely and least publicized tourist attractions. Centralia, Pennsylvania once thriving with 14 active coal mines and 2,500 residents in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s, its thriving business and population hit a decline, and most of its mines were abandoned. Still at that point, over 1,000 people still resided in the town, and Centralia was far from dying until a coal mine fire began below. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the never-ending coal tunnels that miners dug thousands of feet below the surface. And despite repeated attempts to extinguish the flames, the fire still burns to this day. 20 years after the fire started, however, Centralia, Pennsylvania began to feel the effects of its underground fire. as residents started passing out in their homes from carbon monoxide poisoning. The trees began to die and the ground turned to ash. Roads and sidewalks began to buckle. But some residents didn't want to leave despite the health risks. And for the next 10 years, legal battles and personal arguments between neighbors became the norm. The local newspaper even published a weekly list of who was leaving. Finally, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain in 1993, by which point only 63 residents remained. Officially, they became squatters in houses they had owned for decades. In 2013, the remaining residents, which were fewer than 10, won a settlement against the state. Each was awarded $349,500 and ownership of their properties until they die, at which point Pennsylvania will seize the land and finally demolish what structures remain. Well, there we have it. I will see you in the next video. Got an itchy nose, it means gonna have an argument. Gonna have an argument with someone? Did you cough or were you laughing? Oh, it sounded like you were laughing. I was like, what's funny about these miners? Referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometimes... No. Yeah, it's because I expected you to laugh and that in turn made me laugh.
Drowning in Dorothy's Hole?
It's fine. I think I got it out before I started laughing.